Okay, so we were just talking about plain view and electronic searches for information. So now we'll skip ahead a little bit here to electronic surveillance, which this refers to searches conducted using wiretaps, bugs, or other devices to overhear conversations or obtain other kinds of information. Now, contrary to what you see in Hollywood, these require search warrants. You can't just randomly bug somebody's room or their phone or something like that. Um, Now we'll talk about the secretive nature of the search warrants in the last chapter or so, where we were talking about the search warrants. But as you see here, electronic surveillance is a relatively recent concern of criminal and constitutional law. Obviously, back in the day, whenever the Fourth Amendment was drafted, was right around the same time that Benjamin Franklin got the key on his kite string struck with lightning, or so we're led to believe. But anyway, electricity had not yet really been harnessed at the time of the Fourth Amendment. So, not only had electricity not been harnessed, the concept that we're dealing with today of electronic surveillance had not even been fathomed by the writers of the amendments back then. So we're dealing with an entirely new concept legally. And of course, the other thing is the Constitution doesn't give us very much guidance for balancing, excuse me, privacy interests against the need for effective law enforcement in the area of electronic surveillance. So, if you recall, we were talking about search warrants here a little while ago, a couple chapters ago, something. And we were talking about the evolution of the right to privacy. And originally, the Supreme Court was taking a hardline stance on physical property. But then around the 1960s, I believe it was, that we were talking about, the court changed its opinions and looked more toward the individual's right to privacy rather than that the right to privacy in the Fourth Amendment follows the individual, not the individual's property. And so with that, we find ourselves with a court that is struggling to balance your your individual right for privacy with law enforcement's legitimate and genuine need to use electronic surveillance in the furtherance of investigations. So, kind of a big deal here. And of course, I mean, if you watch any kind of good spy movies, you'll find about these wiretaps and bugs and other devices and things like that we use. You might a good film that I would recommend to get a good understanding of how this kind of thing works might be Enemy of the State with Will Smith and Gene Hackman. Um, Granted, there is some Hollywood affect to that film, but understanding the concept of how this works and how easy it is to do these things, it kind of gives you a good understanding of what bugs and wiretaps and things like that are, but not necessarily um, a good understanding of the criminal procedure involved in their use. Okay. So right here we're talking about Olmstead versus the United States, which you remember from our discussion a week or two ago. Olmstead v. the United States was the first electronic eavesdropping case. And basically, it said that the wiretap was not covered by the Fourth Amendment, so no search warrant was needed, and the Fourth Amendment was not violated because the conversation that Olmsted had was not a tangible item of evidence that could be seized. But then, like I mentioned just a moment ago, in 1967, under Katz v. United States, the focus changed from a property approach to a privacy approach, where they said electronic surveillance does fall within the realm of the Fourth Amendment. Um, and just kind of as a personal aside here, if you really want to read some really good case law, a lot of landmark cases, take a look at a lot of the cases coming out of the United States Supreme Court during the 1960s. That was really a pivotal decade in both criminal case law and civil rights case law, which, of course, as you know, was also around the time that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was conducting a lot of his marches. Those of you who've taken my intro to criminal justice class have viewed the film Selma, which documents Bloody Sunday there in Selma, Alabama, one of Dr. King's famous marches. But anyway, before I get too far off topic, I just wanted to drop that in there that you'll notice that a lot of Fourth Amendment case law and a lot of good civil rights case law came out of the United States Supreme Court during the 1960s. So moving on. So you'll see a lot in your textbook where it refers to Title III. And in Title III, it refers to Title III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. And so the Title III of that act kind of helps to balance the need to use electronic surveillance against the need to protect individuals' privacy rights through judicial supervision in all aspects of electronic surveillance and establishment of warrant procedures. So the big thing is here that the Constitution didn't give us a lot to work with. So courts were just kind of willy-nilly trying to sort it out the best they could. And so the Congress passed the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 to try and provide some manner of legislative supervision or legislative guidance as to how the Fourth Amendment would apply to electronic surveillance. And like it says here, it establishes judicial supervision in all aspects of electronic surveillance and establishment of warrant procedures. So in this, basically, the legislature gave guidance to law enforcement through a law, and then from that, that kind of helps the Supreme Court make decisions to help in limiting what's going on here with electronic surveillance. So Title III specifically authorizes state law enforcement officials to apply for, obtain, and execute orders authorizing or approving the interception of wire, oral, or electronic communications. These procedures are also similar to those governing federal interception orders, but the state procedure must also be authorized by a separate state statute. Okay, so basically the thing is here is Title III essentially says nothing in this section shall prohibit state law enforcement officials from doing the same things that this law allowed federal law enforcement agents to do. But it says in there specifically that in order for, it doesn't necessarily authorize state law enforcement officials to do it, but it doesn't prohibit it. It says that for state officials to do it, their state legislature has to pass a state statute basically authorizing the exact same thing that this title does, because this law only applied to federal agents. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and I'll start you a second or a third video here in just a moment.